Okay, hi everybody. Greg Lothian here. We're going to talk about probably one of the most important things that I do to prepare to work with my clients on a regular basis and make sure that I'm really doing everything I can for their progress, so that every time they come in, I have something relevant to work on. Also, there are times that you make yourself a plan for what you're going to work on that day, and then they come in with a bit of news that will completely disarm those plans, and you have to work on something else. And having a priority list like the one that we're going to go over today is going to help you to make sure that no matter what happens, you can always go back to your priority list, figure out the things that you need to work on, and see the progress you've made already, and move forward in that way. So we're going to go through Eric's eval, the things that I found throughout. So hopefully you watched the case study video. It was actually pretty interesting. And in editing the video, I did find a few other things. And I'm just going to show you how to create your priority list so that you know what you need to be working on at any given time. So this is Eric's assessment. And we talked at the beginning of the course about how to set up your front page so that you know the things that you're working on and you know what point they're at. So definitely here having their major goals. Eric's being versatile is huge, and being athletic as long as possible, and I think that's ultimately a goal for a lot of people. So definitely have your major goals, major focuses, and your major limitations. So I know with Eric looked at x-rays and other reports from the orthopedic surgeon, and he's had facet compression, DDD, which is extremely common, degenerative disc disease for the huge swath of the population. It just means, if you don't know, it just means the discs are shortened in height. And he has joint wear, so uneven joint wear. And so when I look at this, the facet compression, uneven joint wear, these are things, they're structural problems that we can actually correct or help to correct. The DDD is a structural problem that we're going to have to work around. So great to have that information, especially if you have a decent sized client load. Current skills, obviously, I haven't started him on the skill body protocol yet, or at this point when we're doing this. But as I give him more things to do, I'll be writing what skill he's working on, and then what stage he's at, the date, and it helps me just keep track of the progression. And other info, like we talked about before, other professionals. This is relationship development for you, so super important. That's why I go over it. So I just whipped through the top of this. We're not going to go through that. We went through it earlier on in the course, and we'll get straight to creating your priority list. So starting with your big three, and we're going to go through all the sheets. So we're going to go through the fundamental eval, and we're going to go through the 6-skill eval. And we're going to pick apart what we found in here, and we're going to place it on our list here. This is actually an Excel sheet, and we'll build it out as we go. But I'll give you an idea of what all of this means. So obviously you put name, date, that sort of stuff. Now these 4 columns are extremely important. The way I create my priority list, there's obviously going to be different things. I want to be able to write this in as shorthand as possible, so that I'm not consuming a ton of space. So I set up these 4 columns. First column, ED, is for education. So anything you need to teach them, any neurological learning they need to do, practice, anything like that that's centered around just learning, we're going to put an X in there. So like, if I put an X for education, and then I write anything else, maybe TVA, so it tells me right away that when I look at this sheet that, okay, so possibly the person we're working with really can't even just activate their TVA. They need to just practice it and learn it, that sort of thing. So that's how that works. The next column is to release. So these are hands-on techniques that you can use, whether it's, if it's just basic stretching, or if it's, some other techniques that you use, depending if you're in the fitness world or you're in the therapy world. You might have more hands-on techniques, but any of these release techniques to help improve their biomechanics, to create more balance in them, all of that sort of stuff, that's what I use this column for. Lengthen is often related to release, but it's something I put the category lengthen as something where I can give them things to do. It may include some, stretching that I do with them, or a flexibility program that I give them at home, or and related to any particular exercises. STR is strengthened. So now maybe I know that there's a section of the body that he can do it. It's in balance, so release and lengthen are in balance, but we need to work on strengthening it so that it can more readily support them. Then I would put strengthen. You could check off more than one column, as you'll see as we go through this, related to whatever problems we find. Then we write the specific targets. So like I said, educate, TVA, that sort of thing. And the priority. So priority I list as a 1, 2, or a 3. 1 is immediate, needs to be done to either like eliminate joint wear or correct a problem or increase performance. It's directly related to what we're doing. It's a priority 1. We need to change it now. Priority 2s are definitely, they need to be changed. It might have to be changed after we work on something else, and we have a little bit of time to work on it, or we know we're going to get to it in phase 2 or phase 3, something like that. Priority 3 items, and like I said in the some of the other videos, at least in Eric's video as well, priority 3s are reserved for, there are things you're going to find that maybe don't even they don't really need to be changed. They're not really affecting their life. We could change them if we can get to them. It would be better for them, or better for minor changes in their life and that sort of thing. But nothing. It's nothing that we really need to get to. And to be honest, I only put things as priority 3 if I'm really not worried if we never get to it. But if we could get to it, and we train for a long period of time, there's extra things to work on there. And what you'll see is. I might throw priority 3 things into a program because of all the priority 1 and 2 things that I put into the program. I really don't want them working on more than that. So it gives an opportunity to put some priority 3 things in there and do some changes. So we'll get into building it right away and going through this the evaluation line by line. So when it came to Eric, the control of his neutral spine, he could do it even under resistance. I did check afterwards. I don't know if you watched the video. In the video, it doesn't say outfield, or it doesn't show outfield. I tested it after. But in any given position, and actually I tested it as well with a significant amount of weight on his back for squatting, and he could still manage his neutral spine under what I would call moderate to extreme stress. So we don't have anything there to work on. But when it comes to TVA and bracing, we do. So bracing, and what we found with Eric is he could activate his TVA. His TVA was and palpably contracted. So like it's not like he was just pulling his stomach in and his TVA wasn't active. It was definitely active. But we need to reinforce that, and we need to separate his TVA and that bracing technique away from especially rectus abdominis, that sort of thing. So one of the things I would put in here, I would definitely put, we're going to educate to separate the TVA from rectus. So you can write it in whatever shorthand you want, but I put DES for dissociate, TVA, and rectus. Okay, so a priority for that. This is definitely a priority 1 item because every time he contracts his rectus to stabilize himself, he's partially pulling himself out of neutral spine. So this is definitely a priority 1 item. And then for specific weakness, it's actually in the target area here. I could have put just TVA here and then put dissociate TVA and rectus there, but either way is fine. Sometimes you'll find that you have to use both boxes, and sometimes you'll find that you don't, like in this case. The column for plan is actually, you're going to write that in after, is once you look at your entire priority sheet, as you're going through it, you write down, and I just handwrite it in as I'm working with people over time, the things that we did to address these issues as we go. Okay, so moving on from there. Now, one of the things that I do see actually in with a TVA and the battle with rectus and TVA, that sort of thing, is that the TVA itself is overwhelmed, is easily overwhelmed by the rectus. So one of the things I'm going to put is that the TVA and bracing need to be strengthened. It's actually a priority 2 because we can't do it before we dissociate these two. but the specific weakness is it's overwhelmed by practice. Okay. Then moving on, we're going to move on to range of motion. So this is obviously this is where we're looking at release and lengthen stuff for Eric. So he's internal rotation at 90 degrees, moderately to extremely limited with both legs. So right away we're going to release and lengthen because we'll do stuff and we'll give him stuff. Hip, internal rotation at 90. Oops. At 90. And I always put right and left. Or you can put bilateral or whatever, but you definitely have to signal if it's only on one-sided, which of course we'll see in our external rotation. So this is moderate to extremely limited. And then we go to our next line. So now we have external rotation. So it's moderately limited versus left. So this is an imbalance. We definitely want to correct imbalances as quickly as possible. So we will release and lengthen right, hip, external rotation at 90. Okay. That's priority 1 because it's an imbalance. And then I'm going to put decreased, moderate versus left. Okay. So this is where, so when you're building your programs and you're, oftentimes I'll give one-sided activities for them to do and tell them specifically not to work on the other side. And you can only really find that stuff when you do an eval like this. Next line, so internal rotation at 0 was limited for him on both sides. So again, we do release, lengthen, hip, internal rotation, and I'll put this down bilat. And that's a prior, because you'll find this a lot in sprinters, this could be a priority 1 or a priority 2 item because it's not creating an imbalance. Now, because he's had back pain before, and I know he gets spasm, which is one of the things that we found in the eval when we tested his, I did a technique right there on the video to release some of the spasm that he had on the piriformis on one side. I know that for me this is now a priority 1 item because, he's tight in internal rotation on both sides, but it's also triggering with spasm and back pain and all that sort of stuff. So we definitely need to address this as a priority 1 item, and it's decreased, moderate, bilateral. All right, moving on. So everything else is normal. We go to shoulder. Shoulder, internal rotation at 90 degrees is slight to moderate, decrease on both sides. So if it's slight to moderate, I'm going to give him an exercise to do. I guess I could put it as a priority 3 item for me to work on it, but I know with the amount of stuff that we found, I have other stuff to work on. So I'm just going to give him some stretching to do for that, some range of motion stuff to do, maybe foam rolling, any type of those things, but that he's going to do on his own. And that's my shorthand for shoulder is GH, glenohumeral joint. You just, shorthand makes it a lot easier. It sort of looks like Greek to your clients, but so shoulder, internal rotation at 90 is the target area. I'm going to put it as a priority 2 item, so I'm going to fit it in when I can. I'm not going to delay necessarily because I'd like to make sure that that does change because it's an imbalance between internal and external rotation, but I'm not going to put it as a priority 1 item. So now you have to make sure when you're writing these things that, so his shoulder internal rotation at 90 is, sorry, and this is where my confusion is too sometimes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually write, I'm going to lengthen external rotation I'm going to lengthen internal rotation at 90, and the specific weakness is what in this scenario. I'll give you a few seconds to think about that. Yes, this specific weakness I could write is decreased internal rotation at 90 degrees, but the actual limitation, the thing that's holding him back, is the external rotators are too tight. That's what's holding him back, right? So I'm going to put shoulder external rotators at 90, decreased slight to moderate. Okay, hope that makes sense to you. But that's how I typically write it out. So then when I look at the specific weakness, when it comes to that, okay, I'm gonna lengthen the external rotators. Again, that's just a personal preference. It tends to be with shoulders, I tend to write it out like that, and then some areas I do, and some areas I don't. That's 100% a preference. Whatever you prefer is fine. Whatever you're going to understand the most, it's your priority list. You need to write it in a way that's understandable to you. So now we look at moving on to neck range of motion. So left side bending. We're going to I'm going to write it down as that I'm going to physically work on it myself or get somebody to work on it, probably an osteo. I would probably refer him to an osteo to square out some of this stuff. But the fact that he has that tilted head and the shoulder up, and you're going to see that there's actually another correction we're going to do, but the release lengthen the left side bending. So cervical, CX, I put this, my shorthand for cervical, left side bending. It's a priority 1 to 2 item. It's not severe. I'm going to put it as a priority 2 just because internally I know I'm going to probably refer out for this one, make sure that he sees an osteo, because I have a feeling that, and a lot of the stuff that you're going to write down is sort of like this. I have a feeling that it'll probably unlock a few other things if you can get an osteo in there to release some of the stuff that's going on in the base of his neck and shoulder. Like I said, we're going to give him some exercises for it, but I want to definitely send him to the osteo. And I'm actually going to write that right away. So the specific weakness is decreased left side bending, and my plan is osteo. Okay, and then we move now to, that was all we found in the neck, thoracic spine. He has decreased right side bending, and one of the things you can start to do, like when it comes to neck, T-spine, and L-spine, if you're having a hard time picturing what's going on with their back, or if you saw that in their static posture, they were off-center with their upper body, but not their lower body, that sort of thing, is you can start to draw it out like a stick. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll do a little stick man here, showing, okay, he's side bent left with his neck, and then when it comes to his thoracic spine, he's he's decreased side bending left, and then he's decreased side bending right, so his neck would be off to the right a little bit, and then his spine would be off to the left, and you can start to see the patterns in there that, what could be holding it back. So draw yourself a little stick man with all the right lines, the stuff that you found in his posture. It can help you visualize that sort of stuff. In any case, back to our priority list, side bending right. So it's slightly decreased, so I'm going to give him something to do. So release right thoracic right side bending, and I'm going to put it as a priority 2. You could even put it, it's a slight thing, so you could maybe even put it as a priority 3 depending on how many priority 1 and 2 items you have. I do revisit this thing sometimes, so not sometimes, I revisit it often, but I'll change priorities and that sort of thing. So thoracic side bend right is decreased, so just simple decrease. Thoracic side bend right. And then we go to rotation, so it's the same thing as a slight decrease in right rotation. Thoracic rotation right. Priority 2, decrease, decrease thoracic rotation right. Seems redundant to write it, but you're entrenched in thinking about it now when you're building it after you've done your eval. You want it as clear as possible so that you don't have to constantly refer back to the eval. You can really just use your priority sheet. Okay, then moving to static posture. So his center of gravity is forward, his hands are forward, he's right-handed with a normal shoulder. So what that means to me is I'll often, probably 99% of the time, I'll ask what handedness, and you have to differentiate between fine motor skill and gross motor skill, and it's gross motor skill that we're asking for. So like if they pick up, push, swing, do all that sort of stuff normally with the right hand, what you should see in their posture is their right shoulder should be slightly lower than their left, especially if they're very dominant on the right side. So when I put right-handed with a normal shoulder, that means his right shoulder is slightly down, which is indicative of handedness. So I will read through all of this and we'll cross-reference it before we start building on our priority list, just to make sure that we have everything is shown properly on all four sides, because sometimes you'll get converse information. So center of gravity forward there, center of gravity right at the pelvis and continues to the neck, and proof of that is his left arm space is decreased. His hands are forward, which we found when he was facing forward as well. And his neck is face forward, which is also indicative of his center of gravity being forward. So, center of gravity, there's not a lot we can do but educate him on it, which we already started the process. And I'll just put center of gravity in general as a priority 1, and the problem that we found was his center of gravity was forward. Here, big 3 was the process that we're starting to use to correct it. And then you could put other things in. If you have somebody with really wild problems for center of gravity, which I've had before in the past, I've done things like, especially for sway back people where they're lean back and they're too arched in their lower backs, take a picture or put some wording on the home screen of their phone so that it reminds them on a continuous basis to correct it. The hands forward, to me, is coming from the elbow and shoulder slide. So the anterior sling for his arm, across the chest, through into the arm, through the bicep and forearm, is too tight. So what I'm going to write there is to release primarily, and maybe give him some lengthening stuff, but I'll probably spend more time releasing it. Anterior arm sling, slash bicep anterior deltoid. That sort of thing, because that can help his hand sit back a little bit more. It is slight, so I'm not super worried about it. I'm going to put it as a priority 2 item. And then I'll just put hands forward. Moving to the neck being forward. So there's 2 reasons why his neck sits forward. One, his center of gravity is forward, but also he's slightly chin out. It's not hugely evident, but if you go back and look at his static posture in the video, you can see his chin is slightly out. So I'm going to put in there to release just his anterior sling from his chin down into his sternum and his rectus. So really that front sling that runs straight down through into it runs in behind the sternum. You have a lot of tissue that goes down through the neck and wraps around the heart and wraps around the lungs, that sort of stuff. And we can release that stuff, which will help him get his chest up a little bit more and bring his neck into a better posture. So anterior sternum. I don't even know if I spelled that right. Anyway, probably not, but that doesn't matter. Sternum. I don't even know if I spelled that right either. Anyway, so anterior sternum, the fascia that runs down through there, and then all the way to his rectus. And I'm going to open that manually. I'm going to put it as a priority 1 because I know there's a couple, from being on the therapy side, I know there's a couple of techniques that can do it right away. And I know that that posture, that chest down posture, and all the work that we're going to have to do with his separating his rectus out from his TVA, this is there's a couple of techniques that I know that are going to help to release some of that pressure and help disarm, hopefully disarm the rectus. So, and I'll just put here, cervical forward as our thing, and pleural release is the technique that I'm going to use, but depending on what your skill level is and what your techniques are, you could use there are a bunch of techniques that you could use to correct that. Okay, moving forward, let's see here, center of gravity right at the pelvis. So yeah, so we didn't address that actually before we move forward. His center of gravity is right, and the space between his from his left arm to his ribs is decreased. So we're going to educate him on that. We'll just highlight it to him. And the thing that I do mostly to correct that is especially when we get to doing squatting, I'll highlight their posture and show them how to center. And I know I've talked about it before. Is showing them how to center their pelvis between their legs and then center their shoulders above their hips. So that sort of awareness, because it's not huge in Eric, I'm not going to give him one-sided activity for it. I think education will change it. If you think that it's significant enough that's creating an imbalance in the tightness from one side to the other, then you could put it as a priority 1 item and to release and lengthen. If he's pulled to the right, that means there's a section in his spine that on the right hand side that's tight and strong, and there's a section on the left hand side that's loose and long. So you could put in, we could put this, if this was more severe, I might put release and lengthen. Let's say we found that the side bending itself was mid-thoracic spine. I would release, lengthen the mid-thoracic muscles and tissues on the right hand side, and then I would actually put to strengthen, in the next line I would put to strengthen the muscles on the opposing muscles on the left hand side. So we could give them double hands-on work on one side and then a one-sided activity, and that will correct his will correct more severe cases than what this is. So I'm just going to put COG right at pelvis. Oops. Okay. So center of gravity, pelvis, and GH is the symbol I use just for teaching him how to keep his pelvis between his feet and then his shoulders over his hips. Okay, moving on to fundamental movement patterns. Waiter's bow. He flexes initially, and he's able to correct with education and tape. So this is definitely a priority 1 item for us. We're going to make sure that he educates his waiter's bow. That's a priority 1. And flexes early. Tape is what I'm going to use to correct it. Okay. Okay, and then his left knee in on his quarter squats, and we talked to him about that. So the left knee in is telling me, and this has to do with, and if you're in the fitness world, you may not know this, but in the therapy world, well, it's you may not know it as well, but one of the things that you're going to find with low back pain is it definitely disarms reflexes and muscles in glutes. So his knee in posture, without a huge neurological deficit, so that he didn't have a disc that was out and pushing on a nerve so bad that it would created a permanent deficit. But the pain itself, the moving his center of gravity over, all of that sort of stuff has allowed the hip on the left side to be either weakened or overwhelmed. So what we're going to do is we're going to strengthen his left hip external rotators. And that's a priority 1 because he's doing a fair amount of squatting already. We need that. We don't want his knee to wear out unevenly. So the weakness is quarter squat left knee in. Okay, and then I'll give them specific exercises after. Okay, so that goes through, and so you could start creating your priority list when you do part one of the eval. Certainly it'll give you stuff to work on, depending, and you can see here that there's a fair amount of stuff to work on. I have this in an Excel sheet so that I can put it all in order by using filters. So if you're not good with Excel, you could certainly learn how to do that. But highlighting it so you can actually make it so that the priority one things are at the top, and then it's sorted out also by, if education comes first, then to me release and lengthen comes second, and strengthen comes third. So we could reorient that. I'm only going to do it at the end, but we can definitely do that. So moving on to his full eval. Now you can see right away that we're a limited amount of space here, which is why I tend to separate this out between the first eval and the second eval. But this gives you a very good idea of the things that I'm going to do with Eric, or the things that how I arm myself to make sure that I know exactly what I'm doing with my clients at any given time. I do want to go through this to create some more clarity for those of you that actually watched the entire video and were curious about some things. But we go through it the same way that we go through anything else. Or the first part at least, line by line, toes out bilaterally. Okay, so in his full squat, so there's a couple of things we need to know there. Is his hip anatomy, if you have x-rays of their hip anatomy, is the angle of the hip, of the neck of the femur angled that forces him to keep his toes out, or is it just a biomechanical issue? We always assumed at the start that it's biomechanical, but if nothing's ever changing and you toe somebody in to correct them. So if I put in here to educate and strengthen toe in during squat, and over time it never changed, then I might investigate, okay, well, let's get some x-rays and find out what's going on with your hip, that sort of thing. Depends where you're at, but I do allow a bit of toeing out depending on the person and depending on their anatomy. We know that he's imbalanced between internal and external rotation in his hip, so we're going to work on that. I put this a priority 2 item because I know that once we work on his hip rotators and creating better balance there, that this may change over time. Okay, and that's another reason why I don't typically do both of these at the same time, is because we might be doing things here that are going to affect what we find later. That is incidentally also why I do the eval separate. We did it all at once for Eric, just so that we could demo it, and he was kind enough to allow us to do that and run through and see how I do the eval. But you get the idea. This is you want to separate it out. You're going to have time between part 1 and part 2. If I find a ton of stuff in part 1 that I need to correct with somebody and work on, then instead of going a couple of days or a couple of weeks in between doing part 1 and starting part 2 of the eval, the skills eval, I might go a couple of weeks or a month and tell them, like, there's a bunch of stuff that we need to work on before we do part 2 of your eval. So this does seem like a big list, but to be honest, there's a fair amount of priority 2 items on here, and a lot of the stuff will probably be fairly easily corrected, and just by giving him an exercise program and working on it manually when he comes in. So running through this a little bit more. Like I said, I won't drone on for hours on this, but his lat squat has him right toed out moderately. So when I look at this, he's toed out. He's toed out bilaterally when he does just a regular full squat, and then as soon as he engages his lats, all of a sudden his right toes out more than his left. So that's telling me that it's actually the posterior sling. So if you think about this, when his left arm is up and reaching forward, then his left lat is tight. So the sling running from the palm of the hand down through the forearm through the medial parts, so the inside part of the upper arm, inside the bicep, that sort of sleeve where all the nervous system is, then down into the lat, across the back, and actually around T8, sort of crosses over to the other side, goes through the glutes, down into the IT band, down into the knee, and then sort of spirals around the knee a little bit. Is that particular sling is too tight. So it's causing him to toe out on one side. We've also found in his eval that he had, I'm skipping forward because I know the eval pretty well by now, but we found in the eval that he had the shoulder issue. If you guys watched the eval, then when we looked at, where is it here? Shoulder pull down, separates in two phases. Oh, it's here somewhere. I know it's here. Oh yeah, in his standing press. Sorry, that's where it is. In his standing press, his right shoulder is up versus his left. And that's where we also found that his head was tilted and all that sort of stuff, which we can, we saw it when his arm was up, but we also saw that in our first eval that his neck, he had decreased side bending to one side, which skews your posture a little bit. In any case, it's showing that this entire sling here is definitely being affected. So I would actually put, for Eric, I would put that I am going to release his posterior sling, and I'll put left arm to right, just so I know which sling I'm talking about. And I'll put that as a priority 2 item because we're not going to get to it before we do all the fundamental stuff. So, in any case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to post this entire eval, and it would be a great exercise for you to run through this entire eval. And if there's any shorthand here that you don't understand, I think most of it we've gone through. Thoracic, lumbar spine. ED is education, GH is shoulder, and all of these are slight to moderate, that sort of thing. Run through the eval, and you can start with a fresh priority sheet for part 2, and run through this eval and start creating a priority sheet of the things that you would correct as we found them in Eric's eval. So I know this seems like a lot of work, and I'm sort of doing it on the fly here. With you live, or as I'm recording this video at least. It's a lot less work than it seems, and it's going to save you a ton of work. It doesn't mean it's no work. It's definitely some preliminary work before the next time you come in. But what you should do is once you do part 1 of your eval, you should carve out 10 minutes to build a priority list. You can write it out by hand based on what you found in the eval, and then when you do any other eval, so if you do an eval where you're just doing an individual skill or 2, or you're doing the 6-skill eval, then definitely build yourself a priority list, and it's going to serve you in many, many ways. It's going to serve you by being able to relay information to other professionals. It's going to allow you to make sure that you work on the right things at the right time all the time. Not only that, when you show your clients this list, not only will it motivate them to get working and start correcting this stuff, but it shows to them that besides the fact that they're probably already impressed by the level of depth that you're going in with them for the eval, that is a commentary I get very often. People don't believe how in-depth the process is, and they truly appreciate it. When you show them this list, and I don't typically hand it over because it's written in all shorthand, which they wouldn't understand anyway. But when you show them this list, it really allows them to trust you more and put and allow them to or motivate them, sorry, to do all of the things that you're trying to teach them and apply to them and all that sort of stuff, and they know that they're secure, that they have a direction that they're going in, that they're correcting all this stuff, and really is a lot of people are very amazed by this part of the process, and believe me, it is going to make your life much, much easier. Okay, so good luck with that, and if you have any questions about it, then definitely let me know. And I'll post the priority sheet as an Excel sheet so that you can actively use it as an Excel sheet. Like I said, so you can reorient it and you can type into it. As a PDF, it doesn't work as well. But definitely, you know, if you want to handwrite this, it's a living document. It will change over time. Sometimes it's a little faster to handwrite it, and I do handwrite some of them, especially if I'm pressed for time, or I know, like, I have some things in my head that I definitely want to get on paper right away. I will handwrite this. So do what you will with it, but this is definitely a tool, probably one of my secret weapon tools that I use all the time, and I've barely ever seen anybody use this before, and it saves me a ton of work in the future. So good luck with that. Let me know what you think, and we'll see you in the next video.